Welcome to the Link Up. Today we're making connections. We're starting personality interviews with people you may know or you may not know in our community and sometimes beyond. What makes them tick? Why do they do what they do? How do they do what they do? And especially at this time, how has their COVID journey impacted on their lives and those around them? On today's show, we link up with James Wilson, well known funeral director with a musical past. You may know that or you may not know that. Now, let's get an opportunity to chat with Mr. James Wilson. But before we find out about your COVID journey, sir, let's take a look back. That musical journey of yours, one with the well known Fantastics. I do believe your brother was in the Fantastics as well as Ronnie Cumberbatch. And of course, we can't forget Fern Trail. How did you get into that band, into that group?
My brother and I, which is Lloyd and I, we formed the group, the Fantastics. And we're always into music. We thought the best way to express ourselves is by having a band. Prior to that, I was involved with the Troubadours, one of the founding members of the original Troubadours. Those are days when we used to ride bicycles from one place to the next. So even the Fantastics, we were still at school with the Fantastics and with the group of female singers called the Fantasies. There were groups of musicians or bands on every block, as you call it. And the musicians then and even now were all natural musicians. In other words, we heard it in our ears and we played it. A lot of musicians didn't go to school to learn music. So a lot of musicians most of the musicians, 99% of musicians were natural musicians. So the core behind most bands is called a combo. So the combos was lead, rhythm, and bass, and then the drummer. Any other bands built around that, whether it was eventually adding a saxophone, a trumpet, whatever you want to do, that's the basis behind a band. And of course, you can have either a piano or the organ. Okay, the Fantasies was Reverend Jones at Top Rock's daughter, Valerie Jones, and most of her friends at Foundation, which was the late Maureen Lowe, Beverly Cave, Annette King, and Leo Marshall. Hope I haven't missed out anyone.
Okay.
And they were all at school as well. And they were the Barbadian Supremes. They sang the songs the Supremes. And apart from that, Valerie Jones was a very good writer. She writes songs, even today she writes songs.
Incredible voices. I mean, incredible talent. I'm hearing in a long white room in my ear right now. And, I'm just remembering those sultry tones and that music, because I was a little girl coming up in those days. That's the music that I grew up on and thoroughly enjoyed. All right, we're going to take a quick break, James, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about how you got involved in the profession you're in now. So we'll do that when we come back on the other side of the break. Today we're making a link up with Mr. James Wilson, and he is, of course, the managing director of Downesand Funeral Home, but a gentleman with an incredible musical past back from the early days of the Troubadours and then the Fantastics. And now we get an opportunity to find out from him just how he got involved in the profession that he's in now, because I understand that he has a Bachelor of Sciences degree in Community Mental Health Sciences, and that was in New York. So how did that particular journey come about from playing music and then making the shift, sir, into the profession you're in now?
Well, let's put it this way. I, like so many people in Barbados, were professional musicians. That's all we did. We played music at the hotels, at the clubs, 7 or 6 days a week. And we did that professionally for many years. There were lots of people coming to Barbados then, attending lots of shows. It came a time in our lives when some of us wanted to get married. Like my younger brother Lloyd, he said he wanted to get married. So we were all thinking about doing different professions apart from music. I
Hmm.
studied all the things that would be interesting and that I could do. And above, strangely to say, I thought I could become a funeral director. So I made plans to attend
Just
a
like
mortuary
that.
school in America, and I studied mortuary science, and I lived there for a few years until I had enough knowledge and practice.
Okay. So when you do that as a study, as I said, you have your degree in mental and health sciences. What's that?
After studying mortuary science, it was very important to always find another subject to study. And I thought I should study something to do with community health or psychology. And that's what I did at New York Tech in Long Island. So I did that as an additional study because also deals with grief and dying.
But how do you deal with that?
Well, I think it's to be a good, there are funeral directors, embalmers, and funeral directors. But to be a caring, not that the people are not caring, but it's something that has to come from within. One has to be very dedicated. I'm not a scornful person. If somebody is sick or leave something on the floor or whatever has to be done, I take care of it. So I think it's part of me as an individual that would find no problems in being a mortician and dealing with people who've died, people who've passed on.
Tell me about the mortuary in New York that you were affiliated with before you moved back home.
It wasn't just a mortuary, it's a place called Benter's Funeral Home. It's a very large establishment owned by the Benter family that came originally from Antigua. There were two
Ah,
very prominent film directors in Harlem in the 50s. There was a Barbadian man, and then there was Mr. Benter. Eventually, they broke up, they separated, and Benter started his own establishment. Uh, the establishment is on 6 floors. In other words, there are 3 floors dedicated to apartments, and there are 3 floors dedicated to the funeral business. So it's a pretty busy and well-equipped business. Our son, his name is Dean Wilson. He works with them, the same place where I worked.
hmm. And when you take a look at how you did business then and how business then got changed in 2020, perhaps it will be a good time to ask, what was your COVID journey like? And how has it not only impacted how you do what you do, but also impacted you personally?
We were taught at school to deal with all cases, whether it's someone who died in an accident, it was later on someone from AIDS, or now someone who died from the novel coronavirus. The training in the mortuary is such we are prepared to deal with anything that comes around. Anything that comes around, we can deal with. And we handle all cases as though there may be danger.
then COVID comes around and now is a whole other level of danger that you're talking about.
This coronavirus, as it was in 1918, which was the Spanish flu, killed many, many people. But the same principles that are used with the Spanish flu, such as to wear a mask, wash your hands, all those things, was used in 1918. So we're doing it now. And I want to say, I want people to remember that ain't gone away, as the same Barbadian terms. Coronavirus is still around. We must continue to wash our hands, stop, being together, physical distancing. Those things are very important. The coronavirus is
Wear
not the
your
respecter
mask.
of person or persons. It could be a man, woman, whatever.
And then you find that for someone who has had the honor of, handling two funerals of past prime ministers, to having to deal with not having people allowed at funerals, really, very, very small numbers, where you yourself had to participate, I do believe, in actually the funeral procession and taking part in handling the casket. How does one make that kind of transition in one's mind and in one's dealing with families?
If I may just add one other factor. In the early 70s, AIDS was a big thing in all over the world and even in Barbados. We as Barbadians were curious, concerned, scared about somebody who died from AIDS. We went to different cemeteries, we ran to different funeral homes, we went all about the
Mm,
place hearing that he or she died from AIDS. That's what we did. But that was all in the learning process. Right now, if anyone dies from AIDS or so, nobody knows, nobody cares. I'm not saying that in the bad way that they don't care, but I'm saying that there's not the rush
I understand.
of judgment and to find out who the persons were. COVID-19, like any of those other things I talked about, measles, they're a human to human transmission. So if they pass
Yes.
it to you, you pass it to 10 people, 10 people pass it to 50, 50 people pass it to 100, 100 pass it to 1,000. So if we want to survive, if we want to live, we have to follow the regulations, which was originally no viewing, eventually 10 persons, only the family, only the funeral directors and the immediate staff. The whole idea behind it is to keep us away from it. That was the real principle behind transmission.
What what do you know for sure as you look back over all of the things in your life? What can you say that you know for sure? And what has this whole journey taught you and what has it created in you as an individual?
What I've learned in life is that we must think about each other on the kinder basis. Some people think that they're God's gift to the earth, but we're happy and we're fortunate to be here. We don't know how long we will be here. So the time that we're here, we must be kind to each other. We must think about each other. And we must help each other when we can. That's what I think I've learned.
Mhm. And what are some of the most memorable moments of your life that you can share?
Most memorable thing is having family, having my brothers and sisters that I grew up with, knowing their grandchildren, and knowing our son Dean and my brother's children. That's the most memorable thing. Family is the most important thing, especially when you have close family.
Hmm. And for those who might want to get involved in the business now, how, what kind of advice would you give them?
Well, if anyone is getting involved in the funeral business, one should go for it. But understand that it's not as it seems. It looks as though it's all rosy. A lot of people come to me and tell me, I want to drive the hearse. I want to drive the hearse. That's only one part of it. There are parts where people die. It's not pleasant. In other words, there are lots of unpleasant things about death and dying. And those are the things that make it important. If a family is sad, we have to be strong and make them comfortable. And one has to be able to do that to be successful.
I'd like to thank you very much, James, for joining us today. I know that the journey through COVID and so on has not been an easy one. It's been a learning curve for all of us. I thank you very much for your advice.
Peter, thank you for inviting me to the link up. And we hope that someone will, if not learn something, appreciate what we've done.